I'm restarting. Today was in Genesis 28, and it was interesting because I watched a video where it was talking about being in the presence of God. And so sometimes I feel like I have a tough time. It's hard for me to comprehend because when I think of being present, I think physically, right? But that's not always the case, right? You can be physically present around people and not be emotionally present, right? Or you can be present but not um, you can be emotionally present with somebody and not be physically there, right? In a phone call or something, like you can, right? And so there's a lot of different things. There's like, it's like, what does it mean to be in God's presence? And because I watched a video and he was talking about the love of God and like when you actually are in God's presence, it is different. And so I was praying about that. I was like, God, what does it mean on a deeper level, right? I always need reminders for things. And so funny enough, I read Genesis 28, which is when God appears to Jacob in a dream. And so it goes, Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He reached a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He took one of the stones from the place, put it there on his head, and laid it down in the place. And he dreamed. A stairway was set on the ground, and the top reaching the sky, and God's angels were going up and down it. The Lord was standing there beside him, saying, I am the Lord, the God your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your offspring the land on which you are lying. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out toward the west, the east, the north, and the south. All the peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. Look, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. I'll bring you back to this land, for I will not leave until you have done what I have promised. Till I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He was afraid and said, What an awesome place this is. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. And so that just as God appeared to him. God made his presence known. And I think sometimes we don't always recognize, as Jacob said, he said, surely the Lord is in this place and I did not know it. Right? It's like sometimes we just are completely blind to recognizing it. And that's what I think faith is, and understanding that it is a daily devotion to God, right? It's a choice to follow God. It is a choice to go, God is in this place. We can say, oh no, but he's not. But he is. End this story. God is in a place regardless if we acknowledge it or not. And I think it's so easy to not acknowledge it, right? It's easy to go, God isn't present here. Or in a situation, right? Go, this is just coincidence. This is just things happening. Or this is just a bad thing that happened. God did this to me or something, right? And you're saying that, actually, well, that's a whole other topic. We're not going to get into that. But I'm talking about being like, oh, well, God didn't do that, right? Like, I've heard that before, being like, it coincidence, right? And being like, oh, well, it was just luck, right? And it's like, well, no. Regardless if we want to accept it or not, God is in control, and God is everywhere, and God is moving things that we can and can't see, and that we don't notice. And God is in places. And sometimes God's presence isn't this, I think it's easy to think of things like this, where it's like God appearing to you in dreams every night, being like, oh, like this big moment where you're actually face to face with God, and that's not how it works. That's not how God chooses to reveal himself, because sometimes he does. I mean, I've heard tons and tons of stories about Jesus appearing to people, right, in different parts of the world, in different situations. Paul, Abraham, Moses, Noah, right? It's like that one guy on the road. There's a whole bunch. I don't remember what his name was. There was not Paul, but there was another road and another guy. There's a whole bunch of different situations throughout the Bible where God does appear like that. But then there's times where Yeah, the entire book of Esther. I'm not talking about like God's presence is with Esther. God is with the Israelite people, but it's not talked about because it's not this big revelation. It's not this big viewing thing of angels and horns. It's like they're seeking God, and God's presence is there, and God gives little moments of courage and faith and going, this is what this is. Even in reading my Bible, like what didn't have this like crazy vision, right? It was just like it is God's presence, being in His Word and hearing His words and taking them slowly and really just being there with Him and trying to listen to what He's saying. That is that is a big part of being in the presence of God. Even if it feels small, right? You know, you think about hanging out with friends, and it's like sometimes you're just there with them. You're just in their presence. It isn't necessarily this crazy revelation. It's not necessarily this, you're having these super deep conversations. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And yeah. So I thought that was very, that was just a neat thing that God did, I think, answering a prayer. There's another verse, and this one, it just really stood out to me. It's chapter 29, verse 9, and it said 8? 8. Here we go. So Jacob meets Rachel. The context is, I'll just read it all. Jacob resumed his journey and went to the eastern country. He looked and saw a well in the field. 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it, happened because the sheep were watered from this well. But a large stone covered this opening of the well. Shepherds would roll the stone from the opening of the well and water the sheep when all the flocks had gathered there, when they would return the stone to its place over the well opening. Jacob asked the men at the well, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they answered. "Do you know Laban, grandson of Nahor?" Jacob asked them. They answered, "We know him." "Is he well?" Jacob asked. "Yes," they said, "and here's his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep." Then Jacob said, "Look, it's still broad daylight, and it's not time for the animals to be gathered. Water the flock, then go up for them to graze." But they replied, "We can't until all the flocks have been gathered, and the stone is rolled from the well's opening. Then we will water the sheep." While we were still speaking with them, Rachel came to his father's sheep, for she was the shepherdess. And then it goes into them kissing, them meeting and stuff. But that part about just, it's one of those connection things. It's not really like, I don't know what necessarily the significance of it is. It is them just being like moving the rock. But the thing that we can't wait until all the flocks have been gathered. Stone is rolled from the well's opening. Then we will water the sheep. And then I was like, because I make a lot of connection in my head, I said, the stone is rolled from the opening. Jesus. And then talking about Jesus being the shepherd, right? And then we have water. So it was kind of the 3 big things, talking about living water, being cleansed, being baptized in water and spirit, right? And we can't until all the flocks have been gathered and the stone is rolled. So having the people and the things into place. And I think about part of that going into God's timing, and it always interested me of like, why did God choose when Jesus was born, for Jesus to be born? And why did he choose for any of us to be born when we're born, right? And being like, because the sheep had to be there, right? Until all the flocks have been gathered and the stone is rolled away. So until all have been gathered, right? It's all the pieces, all those different puzzle pieces that have to come together. You know, we see, even in the chapter beforehand, in chapter, what's that, 27? Or 20, yeah, 27, which is the fulfillment, right, of the prophecy about the younger will rule over the older, talking about Jacob and Esau. And so the pieces had to come together. And all throughout the Bible, we talk about prophecy. I listened to this sermon talking about how many times how many times that Jesus fulfilled a prophecy and the probability of that just happening. And so this I and how like Jesus died on a cross, which is was developed right by the Romans, and so had to be in Rome, and in the infrastructure of Rome, and how the political environment worked, and how the setting worked. And the 12 disciples were born at that time, and so things had to line up perfectly for that. And then we talk about, right, the events that would happen, talking about all the different Roman emperors. Like, why didn't it happen in Greece? Like, well, why did it have to happen in Rome? Um, and why did, like, when they're like, why did all these things have to happen at this very specific time? And so that was just a connection. Um, I think of like the right thing, that God will do the right thing at the right time in his way and let his, right? It's like God is going to do what God's going to do. Of like God will get done, but the pieces have to line up. Things have to go in an order, because God knows exactly the order of how things will work. And I just thought that was a fun little. I thought that was a really neat connection. Um, I also do find it interesting, um, going into not the cuckoo bird. What? Talking about right after he meets Jesus and going, and then, well, meeting, yeah. What? What am I saying? Jacob meets God, right? Jacob meets God, and then he gets married, which also connects to the um, the sermon I was listening to the other day in like a kind of interesting way, because it was all about, um, the idea of the church being the bride, right? Um, the the bride of Christ, right? And so talk about marriage, the like coming to God, seeing God, being in the presence of God, and then getting married. Um, I just thought that that was very interesting. Um, that there's, I don't know, it was just a similarity thing where I was like, oh, it's interesting sometimes how like things are connected, things are written, and I'm like, oh, this is like very similar to the order, right? Order of how things go. Um, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I guess kind of the last thing, I think it's so interesting, um, talking about the context of what I love trying to think of what the story is between the lines, right? Of what, like, for example, this whole thing about the stolen blessing, um, with uh, Jacob and Esau, right? And it's the same thing that I imagine with, um, when when he takes his birthright, right? Because we get this context of like, where like Esau wanted some food, wanted some soup, and gave his brother his birthright, and that's what we're told. And so I always want to know what the like interior context of that is. Of like, was Esau was there like famine to the point where there was like all the animals were gone, there was no food. Esau was literally about to like he was probably going to die of starvation or thirst, like to the point where it was like he and Jacob was like I always want to know what the story, like what's the actual storyline? What's the storyline in between? That I'm missing? Um, and same thing with like what was the relationship between, is it Rebecca? Yeah, Rebecca and Esau, right? Because I'm like, obviously Jacob's the favorite. Jacob's Rebecca's favorite. And so the whole thing about like tricking Isaac, and then Isaac kind of knows. Like Isaac is like, "Are you sure that this is the your voice is like Jacob? Like like this voice is Jacob, but physically you're like Esau." And so that was an interesting, um, just an interesting note. Um, but it's one of those wild things. I'm like, what's the interior context of like why was Rebecca so dead set on Jacob being getting the birthright, getting the blessing, but also like there had I always want to think about the story of like was like she and Esau like did they just not get along at all? Like what was the like was he like wild and gruff and difficult and like what was that like I want to know what the like I want to know more of the story. You know what I mean? Like I want to know I want to be able to watch I want to watch the movie. I want to know exactly what the context of the situation at hand is. But yeah, I also think it was wild. The one thing that was wild to me as well, I'm just gonna keep talking, was talking about. So Jacob works for 7 years. Then they have the wedding, and then it says, um, blah 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 blah. Here we go. Since my time is complete, give by me my wife so I can sleep with her. He thinks he's gonna sleep with Rachel. So Laban invited all the men to the place and sponsored a feast. Okay, that evening Laban took his daughter Leah, gave her to Jacob, and he slept with her. And Laban gave his slave Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a slave. When morning came, there was Leah, like it was a surprise. So he said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? Wasn't it for Rachel that I worked for you? Why have you deceived me?" I'm so confused about the context because I guess that's just my wonder is like, how did Jacob not know that that wasn't Rachel? Like, how did he not realize that that was Rachel? Um, like, what was, like, was he drunk or something? Or was it like, it was just dark? Like, I know that they talk about veils and stuff, like face covering, but I don't know if that had begun yet. So I don't know. Um, there was a story about a nose ring. So I'm wondering what kind of like, I'm wondering what the tradition is that, like, how it's possible that you could have a feast and then sleep with somebody and not know who it was. You know what I mean? Like, just be completely surprised by the fact that it wasn't a sister. Um, wasn't the right sister. So yeah, kind of crazy. Also, it is wild when I think about the meaning of names and like when I read out her naming her kids and being like the name of Reuben and being like the Lord has seen my affliction and my husband surely my husband will love me now. And like is that what Reuben means? Like that's a wild meaning for a name. Surely my husband will love me. I don't know if that's actually what it means, but when I read it, I take out of it. So I don't know. It's just really interesting to me. Um, but yeah, that's kind of my little thoughts of the day.